how does depression show up for you, and how is that, impacted and affected your life?
How does it show up for me? I mean, that's a good question. For me, I guess, trying to figure out, because it's very multifaceted, but it's also very, it's like one of those things, right? It mostly shows up for me as overwhelming thoughts of wanting to kill myself,
Hmm.
and just a deep sadness and not understanding where it comes from, right? There usually is a reason behind anything that you feel. And if I can't figure that out, then that's usually an indication that it's a depressive episode.
Hey, thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's something I'd love to also dig into a little bit more, because one of the things that I have learned from honestly you and John sharing about it so vulnerably has been uh, that aspect, right? The aspect of like out of nowhere, this kind of like just dark, really dark cloud can just hit you. It's not necessarily coming from a place or a specific event or anything like that. It's all of a sudden this cloud kind of takes you on. And my experience of it from the outside looking in is like it can be really, really frustrating for you as somebody who maybe struggles with depression, because people can be like, oh, like, well, just do this or change this thing or change that thing or go exercise or have you looked at this? And there can be a lot of like, I'll say misunderstanding of that, or trying to use some sort of personal growth tool to fix it versus being able to say, hey, like this is an actual thing that this person deals with in the same way that you might deal with I don't know, like a peg leg or, or something, or you have some sort of physical malady in the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and like a lot of the things that people suggest on how to deal with what they would see as depression are really good ways to deal with not being sad anymore. And that's not the same thing, right? It's not like I'm sad, it's that I have an overwhelming despair, and the only way that I can think of to get rid of it is to end my life.
Mm.
It's not like it's not being sad. Like sad is easy, and there's an easy link on to the reason that you're experiencing sadness, and it's either going to go away or it's fixable, right? It's not the same as depression, in which yeah, there can be an inciting event for it, and it can also just be like, hey, today it's Wednesday, therefore this week you're going to be depressed. I'm like, cool, thanks, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not super clear in when it's going to happen
Mm.
all the time.
Yeah. What are some of the things, or maybe one thing in particular that you wish people who don't struggle with depression understood about it?
I wish people understood that it's not something that we want to be fixed in the moment. Like people that are depressed in general, from my experience, just talking to those people, they know that they are in depression, and what they're not looking for is how to fix the thing, because we know that it can't be fixed. It just needs to be kind of tolerated until it's gone. And the best way to do that is generally proximity support without trying to cheer somebody up, because that often is seen as a dismissal and not as helpful.
Got it. When you say proximity support, you mean somebody physically being there with you?
Yep. And just not really like you can be more than happy to talk about the depression, but not like, hey, let's go cheer you up. Hey, you want to go out and do this thing? You want to go out and do the fuck? No, I don't want to go do this thing. I can't. Because I'm going to be out there, and the only thing I can think of is like, oh, I wonder how I can like run into this oncoming car instead of doing this
Mm.
thing. I'm like, that's not. No, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. What, and you just mentioned like somebody being basically sitting there with you, but is there anything else that like, I don't say like a friend of somebody who's depressed, or a lover or that kind of thing, somebody who, if we have somebody that's depressed in our life, that any tips or tools for them on how they can better show up for their friends?
Yeah, just understanding like what you're trying to do when you show up for this person during this thing. Often in my experience, it's people are trying to show up for the person who is depressed so that they can move them through that episode as quickly as possible, so they don't have to experience that person's depression with themselves as well. They want to fix the problem so that everybody is like happy again, not because
Mhm.
they want the person. They want to help or comfort or be with the person who is currently experiencing depression, and that's not very helpful. And often people think that, like, yeah, I'm just trying to help you through it. Like, no, what you're trying to do is help yourself through it, so you now don't have to be in this shitty experience anymore, and that makes it way worse, just so
Mhm.
much worse. Yeah, just understand it's not something that needs to be fixed or solved or anything. It's just something that needs to be acknowledged, and you can talk about it and kind of like just kind of help get language around expressing it. And that's it. That's usually the most that you can do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I found that I remember correctly about you talking about Amber, and one of the ways that she supports you really well is she will, like you said, kind of hold space for you and be able to be with you in what you're on, but she'll also communicate, if she doesn't have the capacity to. In that moment, right? And being able to be like, hey, she's in awareness of her own self to be able to be like, hey, I'm not going to be able to show up for you effectively in this moment, rather than trying to kind of put on a face or force herself to do it when it's not working for her.
Yeah, again, and that's something that we've had to work on and figure out, because often she was trying to fix the thing because of her, like, and I don't want to speak for her or kind of like yeah, I don't want to speak for her at all, but often when I was experiencing depression, it was also the specific trigger for her for a lot of her
Mm,
past stuff. So she wanted this experience to move through as quickly as possible and not to actually be helpful in a way that I needed, but she wanted to be helpful in the way that she needed. Right. And like, that's something that we had to learn and kind of deal with. And then once we got there, it's been so much better.
that's awesome. Awesome. Two sort of booking questions with that is, one, are there any signs, or maybe if you want to give just kind of a description, like can you tell when you're starting to go in towards a depressive episode, or is it suddenly you're just kind of
Sometimes.
like, oh fuck, got it.
Yeah, sometimes. But it's
Right,
like, it's not something that it's like, oh, here are these three things that I often do
right.
when this thing happens. It's like, oh, it's weird that I'm feeling this way all of a sudden.
Mm,
And then I'll just kind of like sit with that, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Or maybe it's not, like maybe I'm just fucking tired, right? Like,
mm-hmm,
it's often hard to tell. But the more that I kind of sit with the depression and kind of like sit in it and not try to escape it or fix it, the more awareness that I'm able to get around it, and
mm-hmm,
the earlier I'm able to kind of detect when it's going to come. And often, and sometimes, like, the more awareness that I have with it, the more I'm able to express the things and put names on things, the quicker it can go too.
mm, yeah. And then sort of with the opposite end, when you are starting to come out of it, like how does, say, like, for lack of a better question, like how does that feel, or what is the experience of like coming out of depression like? Is it suddenly you're kind of like, oh, it's been a while and I haven't been depressed, and you just kind of realize that, or is it you can kind of feel
No,
it like opening
no.
up, or
How would you feel if at one moment all of your thoughts are occupied on how you could end your life, and then all of a sudden that no longer exists?
yeah,
It feels pretty good.
yeah, yeah, right. So it is kind of like an almost all of a sudden thing in that way.
Yeah, there's like a tiny bit of like a ramp down from that, but
Hmm.
it's sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm done with this now. That's nice.
Yeah, cool, cool. Thanks for sharing all that. I think that's,
Of course,
and
it's very
always
easy for
fast.
me to talk about for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good and helpful. I feel like there's not really a lot of, often a lot of good conversation around those kinds of things, and I think, um, particularly as somebody who's kind of been involved in various aspects with like the mental health, or not the mental health world, but the personal growth space. It's a lot of those conditions get issued in a way that are not helpful or supportive
What do you
for a
mean?
lot of people. Like a lot of people, I would say like, oh, it's like you have depression. Well, you're not actually depressed. You actually just have this thing, or you just need to do this, or you need to use this trick, or you need to X, Y, or Z, or like you just have this belief system about it versus being like, hey, like you,
Oh yeah. It's, you have this narrative in your head. Like, yeah, the narrative in my head is I want to kill myself.
right,
That's
right,
actually the full narrative. So like, I'm not sure what you're trying to get out of me from here, but yeah, I would just like not to have that narrative anymore. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Again, that's a being sad versus being depressed kind of discussion.
right,
And it's easy for people who have never experienced it to say those things because they don't have any idea what it's like. I mean, like I can't describe, like you just don't, if you've never had it, you just don't understand.
yeah, yeah.
Like it
That's fair.
just, yeah, it's not something that you can even like describe to somebody on the, so.